All right, well, thank you so much. As you can see, we're doing a little bit of a hybrid session, so I appreciate your patience as we are live. My name is Melissa Leitner. I am the director at NAM of the Action Collaborative of Translating Emerging Science, Technology, and Innovation. We have a group of our Action Collaborative members here with us today, which we are really excited to have everyone in person, and we have several hundred of you tuning in online, so we're excited to have a great hybrid session today. Today's webinar is Shaping Responsible Innovation Together, and we're excited to hear from some wonderful panelists as well as our Action Collaborative co-chairs on a vision for responsible innovation in the biomedical ecosystem. Just a quick word before we begin. Again, this is a hybrid event, so we have folks here in person in Washington, D.C. We also have folks attending our broadcast online on the NAM website. So as a reminder, we will ask everyone in the audience to use their mics during the Q&A portion, as well as our speakers who are up here in the front with me. That's the only way folks online are going to be able to hear you. For our audience members, we have a couple of panels and some remarks we'll get through. Victor will moderate a panel with several of our online virtual speakers, and then we will turn to an open question and answer session at the end for our panelists. If you are online, please drop your questions in the box below the webinar broadcast, and we'll make sure someone in the room is able to get them asked out loud. So without further ado, let me turn over to the President of the National Academy of Medicine and the co-chair of the Action Collaborative on Translating Emerging Science, Technology, and Innovation, Dr. Victor Zhao.
Well, good morning, good afternoon to everyone, and welcome. I'm Victor Zhao. It's my privilege to co-chair along with my good friends and colleagues, Mr. Chris Riebacher and Ms. or Dr. Teresa Maldonado. I'm not sure whether I'm trying to look at whether I can be seen on the screen, but I'm looking at a fixed slide deck in front of me. Okay, so no, let's go back. Before we get started, let me say welcome. This is really an interesting experiment, if you will. We have a hybrid event. We have, in this room, 50-some people who've been working on this whole idea of responsible innovation. And they consist of scientists, ethicists, public patient advocacy groups, industry groups, companies, investors, and many others. And I'm probably missing some of them. The whole idea we want to tell you this webinar is that we are working together to do what's right for innovation for the nation and globally. Our whole idea is that innovation is moving so amazingly fast that we can expect a very brilliant future ahead of us. But at the same time, we want to be responsible. And I'll talk about what that is. In fact, the need to be sure that innovation serves everybody and everybody gets to benefit. And that's what we're here for. So for those several hundred people on the webinar, many of them may be public, I'm going to try to navigate this talk with regards to where we are, what we need to do, and then, of course, why we're doing this together. The end of the day is that we want to do this together with all of you, moving forward with trust, with the same kind of value that we all have. So, have the first slide, please. I want to tell you that we're living in an amazing time, unprecedented, where science, technology is moving at lightning speed, and we are looking at things that we've never imagined before. Even back in the 1950s, when pharmacology and drugs and technology came in, as been said by my colleague, in fact, Chris Riebacher, you know, HIV used to be a death sentence. Now we can even prevent it. Cancers used to be a death sentence, and now we have therapy that's effective. And of course, we have vaccines. I'm a cardiologist, heart disease drugs. The 50% reduction in death from heart disease last 50 years. It's really quite amazing. And we look at surgery, where we don't have to no longer have to open up the abdomen or the chest. You can get laparoscopic surgery, robotic surgery, organ transplantation, and even these days, transplanting organs from other species, xenotransplantation. medical devices, pacemaker, defibrillators, non-invasive, and imaging, MRI, it's actually quite amazing, and that keeps going. I think we should all be so encouraged that innovation in science has kept us to where we are today in a really, shall we say, a situation whereby we can have hope when we have illness and we can look at prevention. Now, with that along, you all know about the double helix, the work of Watson and Crick that started the biomedical and genomic revolution where we are today. And of course, everyone knows about digital, internet, and now AI. So where we are today is the last bullet, which is convergence, bring together all these amazing technology. Now you can imagine what that really means, right? Amazing future for all of us. Next slide. So when I think about this, the scope of possibilities, and this is too much of a slide to read through, except to say if you think about biomedical, you got gene therapy, genetic engineering, you can regenerate tissues and organs, you can treat cancer with immunotherapy, you have precision medicine, and you name it. But at the same time, our technology is moving so quickly, from internet to augmented reality, robotics, nanotechnology, big data, and AI. Next slide. So let me give you an example. What's on headlines today? mRNA, headline. Well, mRNA technology has been phenomenal in creating, as you know, during COVID-19 vaccine in record speed, 100-some days. That actually, 300-some days, pardon me, but estimated it saved prevent a lot of deaths. That number obviously varies because it's prediction, but you can see how globally it's been amazing impact. Its platform is not only for vaccines, but can make proteins, you name it. So you can imagine that this platform is going to be used for many, many, many ways to treat diseases. And who doesn't know about Ozempic and Wegovy and GLP-1 agonists, where now not only can treat diabetes, but people are saying, oh my God, I can lose 50, 100 pounds. And of course, it's shown to reduce cardiovascular disease. So everybody knows this when you watch television, when you're in your everyday life. They are not without some areas of debate, which I'll come back to, but they are the examples of what technology and science can do. Next slide. And of course, AI. Who doesn't know about AI? And of course, we know AI based on the fact that we now have so much information from collecting, from clinical record, research settings, everyday life, wearables, etc. When you bring all that together, that phenomenon of data, when able to analyze and also apply AI, you can see the tremendous benefit that we can see ahead of time when these technologies are being used in clinical decisions, in treatment, and helping you monitor and make decisions. Next slide. So I would say the future is really bright with regards to where we are, because I think that we can imagine using the things I just talked about, we can have effective prediction, prevention, diagnosis, and new treatment. More importantly, these technologies, virtual care and others, can change where care is delivered, who's delivering the care, and how care is delivered. And of course, we're thinking about now, you as an individual, when you do need care, seamless, from being at home to the hospital, hopefully never there, but also going across the care and using AI, digital, and all those things. Now, there are some enthusiasts out there, like Chen Zuckerberg, when they launched the initiative in 2016, say, can we, given the amount of emerging science, technology, and advances, can we cure, prevent, and manage all these by the end of the century? I'll leave it for you to debate this, but don't forget, we got another 75 years to go. And when I look back 75 years ago in my life, boy, has the world changed. So I think the whole point is science technology can do public good, can do human good. Next slide. But we have to think about also some of the unintended effects of amazing science technology. You all know this. If you look at the upper right column, we want to make sure that the societal benefits. And so there's always an issue. Look at Wegovy or gene therapy, cost and affordability, right? I think the whole issue of, can everybody afford it? Is this too much burden on our country to have all these amazing stuff and have to pay for it? Access is a big issue. And of course, equity. We want everyone to have the ability to get to the very best health they can get through this science, technology, innovation. There are many ethical issues. Certainly, if you look at the AI and data, there's privacy, security. We have to think about workforce. What's the workforce going to like in the future? And of course, a big part we deal with today is information, misinformation, and mistrust, and to some extent, mistrust of science. Let's sit down here in the slide, AI and biotechnology as an example. And you know this well, right? The use of data. If you have biased data to create algorithm in AI, you're going to end up with the wrong information and wrong decisions. There's always the issue of privacy, but there's also the issue of misuse. People can target it, abuse of fake news and misinformation, all that stuff. And biotechnology, as we talked about this morning, when gene editing is so amazing, it can produce superhuman beings. That's an ethical issue. You can always use this technology to create things that, in fact, may be harmful to people. Biosecurity. Next slide. So I think what we're saying is science is moving quickly. Are we catching up with the science and being able to move it even faster to benefit the public? At the same time, are we addressing the societal, ethical issues? And that's what this group is all about. How do we do it responsibly? How do we accelerate science so we can even get to the benefits faster, at the same time minimize the unintended consequences and the issue that you care about a lot in the public? Next slide. So I say that we have talked about responsible innovation, starting with scientists, clinicians, industry leaders, and society. If you want to achieve the full potential of new technology, we have to together say what we can do and what we should do and what we shouldn't do. We should be able to evaluate early stages of technology science development. What are the risks, benefits, and trade-offs? We have to pay attention to the implication across the innovation ecosystem, and we have to get many people engaged, certainly across the healthcare ecosystem, but the public. In this regard, trustworthiness and integrity is so important. So the social ethical issues, I'll say that we as scientists, clinicians, and innovators can no longer simply say, let's just go and do what we want to do, but we have to think about what are the consequences, how do we benefit everyone, and minimize any kind of risk, hence responsible innovation. Next slide. So this is what we're all about. So today, we have launched a year ago this collaborative called Translational Emerging Science, Technology, Innovation, Health and Medicine, or ACT-ESTI. Our job is work with all of you and the public to look at gaps, look at how to get many sectors involved to get guidance, how to create culture of responsibility, how to make sure with equity, Tony, and of course design and have those tools to help us and help scientists, innovators to look at very early as they develop innovation. Have we thought about these issues and how do we deal with this? How to reduce the risk? And ultimately, as you know, whether a technology or drug gets adopted, whatever, involves policy. Whether they get paid or not involves policy. So how do we inform this? And I'm so glad that I have two amazing co-chairs. You're going to hear from them very shortly. Teresa Maldonado from the University of California and Chris Barker of Biogen. And we have 18 steering committee members, 45 working group members, all working, shall we say, tirelessly for this project. And you can see the range of expertise all represented in this room. Next slide. Okay, so let's say what is responsible. We say responsible is responsive, as been said earlier by someone, trustworthiness. I do want to add the word, as Tony Hatchton around us, equity is in there. Fairness, shared responsibility, that we benefit individually and the whole community. We engage with all of you. We have science is excellent, and we're transparent. Next slide. So what we've done is think about a innovation life cycle or ecosystem, that everyone in this system that's rolling in the same direction, trying to get the best out there to have the public, to have patients use it, that we need to think along those issues of responsibility. And that just simply represents, you start with a research idea, you need to do the testing, you need to design it, eventually technology transfer, you can hear later, to have industry commercialize it, and to have payers to pay for it, and to be everybody having access to it. Next slide. So in conclusion, I think we are living an amazing present time. I can't remember how fast things have moved in my lifetime in the last few years in research, data science, engineering, technology. And we're so excited about this, but to do that, we've got to be responsible. And this is why we're having this webinar with the public and with all of you to say, we are taking responsibility. We want to get the trust that you have. We want to address ethics and access and public trust. And therefore, what we're now doing is to say this initiative is to anticipate those issues so that we can all think about, as we develop innovation, what to anticipate to prevent, and to have a shared vision across everyone and a culture that actually at the end of the day serves everybody and for societal needs. Thank you very much. Let me turn over to Chris Fiebacher, my co-chair.
Thank you, Victor. Good morning, good afternoon to everyone. I represent Biogen, but I'm really representing the private sector, companies large and small. And it has been said that innovation is a team sport. And I think one of your last slides, Victor, you showed the entire ecosystem. So one of the things I'd like to do is thank the National Academy of Medicine for including all of the participants in this decades-long search for new treatments. Now, Victor also said how important innovation is to the health and well-being of our citizens. But one of the things you might not know is how important innovation is to our economy. This drives an awful lot of jobs, and it drives an awful lot of value creation. If you Google the largest employer of the 50 states of our union, you'll see that about 6 or 7, it might be Walmart or Amazon. But for the other states, you're going to find that it is a university-affiliated medical center. So medical research and the care of people has become a major source of employment and jobs in many of our states. Now, innovation obviously will help people, but it only helps our fellow citizens if we actually have support for innovation. And we need that. We have significant funding come from state, local, and of course the national government, whether it be funding for the NSF or the NIH. But even as industry, we rely on the support of things like the constitutional protection of intellectual property. So there's a societal agreement that, we are going to invest, but it has to be innovation that helps people, that translates into a clear benefit. Now, obviously, a lot of us involved in research and development spend a lot of time on scientific discovery, evidence gathering, stringent regulatory review, and also significant capital investment. And these are all foundational to innovation. But for someone to actually benefit from all of that, there are 2 other elements that are sometimes forgotten and which I think Victor has highlighted in his presentation. Those 2 things are acceptance of the discovery and access of the discovery. And, I can tell you as the CEO of Biogen, we were one of the first companies in biotechnology and a founder of Kendall Square, which today is one of the most important and productive biomedical research centers anywhere in the world. But at the time of the founding of the company, yes, we could produce these monoclonal antibodies that are today used in the fight against cancer and in various immunology conditions. But back then, in the late 1970s, people were concerned about, recombinant production. That sounds dangerous. headlines in Cambridge read Frankenstein medicine. And it was indeed actually a group of experts, a multifunctional group that got together in California to propose responsible means of producing these monoclonal antibodies. And that was taken to a city hall meeting where the citizenry was represented. And there was a clear and transparent discussion around how these principles could protect citizens, but how also important these new products were going to be in the practice of medicine. And I think that's what we're trying to do, because as Victor has shown, there are a lot of other things that can create concern, whether it's gene editing or AI or other things. And so one of the most important things is to understand what are the concerns. And to do that, you have to be able to listen. And I think that's why we're all here today, and that's why we're having this webinar. The other, of course, that Victor pointed out is access. Innovation that is not going to help me is not something I feel great about. You know, this cannot be innovation that only helps the populations in our coastal cities. So innovation, and I think that goes back to the responsive innovation, can we innovate not just the treatments, but the methods of delivery of treatment so that everywhere in the country people can benefit from these innovations? That means, how do we get care where people are, and how do we make that care more affordable? And there are technologies like AI which can cause concerns, but equally, AI has the promise to dramatically reduce the cost of doing innovation, and hopefully also the cost of treatments. So in all of this, we're looking to build trust, we're looking to listen, and we have also tried to find a practical solution to this, and that practical solution looks like a playbook. How do we help scientists to think about, let's not wait until we get to the end of the long discovery process to discover that there are concerns in society. Can we, without stifling in any way the tremendous effort that is done to actually bring these innovations to patients, but can we build some of this responsible innovation in as we go along, so that when we get to the end, hopefully we've addressed not only those concerns, as well as the regulatory and the medical issues, and get more rapid uptake and therefore faster relief from some of the healthcare challenges that many of our citizens then face. So thank you again to the National Academy of Medicine for bringing this all together.
Thank you, Chris, for those really amazing remarks and setting the stage for the rest of the meeting. Let me turn over to Teresa Maldonado, the other co-chair.
Thank you very much, Victor and Chris. I'll just add a few points to their remarks. So I represent the university sector. I'm also not in the medical field. I'm an electrical engineer. And so I applaud Victor for including me in this discussion. It's been an amazing year working with this group, and I look forward to getting to the finish line. So from the university perspective, talking about University of California, we have 10 amazing campuses, and we also partner with our Department of Energy National Labs. We manage and co-manage 3 of them. We also have Ag and Natural Resources, which is a community of researchers that also have extension, and we actually partner with them to get out to communities in all counties of California. So I'm already talking about the non-traditional parts of academia that we bring to bear in trying to advance our innovations. Now, the speed of innovation is actually intimidating. We now, just from 12 months ago, we're seeing the rapid pace of AI gaining traction in the medical field, and even to the questions of how we manage data and in privacy at the university and also with our partners. We have to really think about how we align our incentive structures with our partners in industry, the federal agencies, state agencies, and the communities. speaking to the culture of responsible innovation. In order for the public to benefit, we have to think about how we scale our innovations responsibly as well. So there's a whole process in scaling our work, and then how we message our work. Victor and Chris spoke about gaining trust. It's easier said than done. You can have one conversation with another party and totally destroy the trust between the two parties. At the universities, we are very focused on developing innovation ecosystems. So when you think about the biomedical innovation ecosystem, it's very complex. And in this group, we're talking about how can we be actionable. And so the timeline of universities and developing innovations, we need to, with me being in the administration, support our brilliant innovators across the university and work with them to guide them through the pace of innovation and to ensure that they work with the right partners and stakeholders at the right time. And that requires a nimble governance structure as well, which you will hear about in the conversation today, and not to mention culture change at the university. In some departments, in fact, this type of work is not met with positive attitudes in promotion and tenure. And so I work with our campuses in trying to socialize the importance of innovation along with fundamental research in their work. And so driving biomedical innovations, I think, will be welcomed across our universities. And in fact, our universities are doing quite well in this space. Finally, so we're going to be talking about some tools and governance structures here in this work, and you'll see more to come in the next 12 months. And so I work with my colleagues on the campuses to see how we address university culture and adapt the great work that's happening on the steering committee and try to adapt it to the university culture. So we work in partnership and harmony with industry and other stakeholders such that the public can benefit from this work. So thank you. I'll turn it back to Victor.
Thank you, Teresa. I think it's very clear, of course, that a lot of innovation, breakthroughs come from university research. So it plays such a central part of innovation ecosystem, the very beginning, that drives subsequently all the way to commercialization. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to have two panels, each one very quickly presenting their experience, and particularly for those who are not understanding how it works, how do you take innovation to practice? And then, of course, importantly, to look at how to, in fact, we think about patient and community. Each of these panels will have 3 people, 5 minutes each, and I'll take questions at the end of both panels rather than between each panels. So the first panel is responsible innovation to practice, and we have really some of the leading, I would say, experts, mover shakers in this room. And that is, in fact, first, Mickey Tripathi, who is from the Mayo Clinic. He's the Chief Artificial Intelligence Implementation Officer. Of course, you're going to hear the amazing stuff that Mayo's doing. And of course, we'd like to hear how he's moving this forward. Then we're going to hear from Dan Ohlendorf. Dan, in fact, is the Chief Science Officer, Director of Health Technology Assessment and Methods and Engagement at ICER. So they really are right in the midst of looking at how to manage, and he's doing that, the internal health economics capacity and programs external collaborations. We're going to hear how that's, and then of course we're going to hear from Kathy Koo, who is a good friend. I've known her from Stanford days where she was a Chief Technology Transfer Officer, now at Wilson Sonsini as Chief Licensing Advisor, Technology Transaction. And she's going to tell you how technology, therefore, that is being developed, as we talked about, is being moved, in fact, towards the next step in looking at how to produce products and commercialization. And each one come with enormous experience, and they're going to get 5 minutes, to talk about their piece, and I'm going to go to the next panel, and then we're going to open for general conversation. So let's start with you, Mayo Clinic.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank
Can
you.
you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Terrific. Well, thank you for the opportunity to be here, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion. So let me, in 5 minutes, give you a perspective on how we're thinking about this at Mayo Clinic and some of the parameters that we use in thinking about responsible innovation, and then happy to dive into more details during the discussion. So one of the things that I think is a core construct that we just need to remember for provider organizations in particular is that responsible innovation is not something that's new to Mayo Clinic. As a leading academic medical center and a destination medical center focused on serious and complex care for patients from around the world, we've always been in the business of responsible innovation, from the standardized medical record in 1914 to the development of high-altitude mask and anti-blackout G-suits for military pilots in World War II, clinical application of steroid cortisone, for which Mayo clinicians won the Nobel Prize, first successful open heart surgeries, first FDA-approved total hip replacement, and in every leading academic medical center in the country and in the world has these kinds of innovations that they are pushing, and with a focus on responsibility. So the idea of responsible innovation isn't something new, and certainly as we think about AI, just within Mayo, we have about 100 AI technologies that are now being used in the practice, and about another almost 300 internally developed solutions that are in our pipeline now, working their way toward implementation in the practice. And those are solutions that are just the internally developed ones. We have a number of vendor partners, either through our electronic health record vendor partner, Epic, as well as other third-party vendors who we bring these solutions. And these solutions are in two big groups. Some are about how do they allow humans to be more efficient? So taking the things that humans do every single day, when you think about administrative kinds of tasks and rote sort of tasks, and allow them to be more efficient, but increasingly solutions that do things that humans can't do, that are able to see things in images and in pathology slides and in other signals, ECGs, for example, that the human eye or human senses can't detect. So it's tremendously exciting, and we're fully embracing the opportunities that we have in front of us with AI. But I will also say now that there are a number of things that are different about AI technologies that have to be addressed, and we're now putting into place in my role here at Mayo as the Chief AI Implementation Officer, a unified discipline process that focuses on shortening the time from bedside, from bench to bedside, as it were, for AI technologies, but with a focus on improving patient outcomes, maintaining patient safety, and reducing administrative burden along the way. So that's what we're focused on from an executive level position as a top-down sort of governance structure to make sure that this burgeoning innovation that we have can be accelerated responsibly as quickly as possible. Because one of the things I think that we need to remember, and we are certainly taking this more and more seriously every single day as we look at these solutions and the potential they have, is that we need to balance the opportunity cost of not getting a solution that could have tremendous benefit for patients into the hands of our front-facing healthcare professionals as quickly as it responsibly can. That every minute that goes by or every day that goes by that life-advancing technology isn't in their hands is an opportunity lost for our patients. And we take that very seriously. So we think that we need to be thinking both about the potential misuse of these technologies, but also the misuse of these technologies and how do we strike that balance. So a couple of things that I'll just flag as deep considerations for us. First is that the broad and deep transformative potential of these technologies is kind of a new challenge. Now that we have EHR systems and that give us electronically enabled workflows across the enterprise and tremendous troves of digital data to learn from and mobilize, there isn't a part of the organization that isn't going to be touched by these AI technologies. So that in and of itself is a different challenge, and it's different in terms of the scope and the scale of what that innovation potential is, and the responsibility that we have to have as we think about the sort of the proliferation of these technologies. Second, Velocity is very high, and I think Victor, you had said something about this, and it's accelerating from what we can see, and just our internal sort of discovery that's happening here. And so we need a governance and implementation process that is able to keep pace with that, and that's what we're focused on now. Third, it's not just about the technologies. There's a famous Yogi Berra quote that that baseball is 40% physical and the other 100% is mental. I would say that there's a similar analogy with AI, that 40% is the technology and the other 150% is implementation. So we've got to be considering, as we think about responsible innovation, not just the sort of the performance measures and other things about the technology itself, but the implementation practices and the workflow insertion practices that we're using to make sure that we have that responsible and innovative potential all the way across that life cycle. Couple of other things I'll just mention. Balancing of risk. We have to evaluate these technologies against current practice, not against a theoretical perfect standard. One of the things, and this is similar, I think, to the conversation that we're having nationally and globally about self-driving cars, that we can certainly have metrics that say 95%, 93%, 95%, whatever it is. But if we look at the way practice happens today, it is far from 90%, 92%, 93% in all areas, I think, as we all know, especially in the US. So we always want to be looking at these technologies against current practice and see if we can use them to make sort of stepwise improvements in what we do today, as sort of the balance, and as we think about the sort of this idea of responsible innovation. Finally, the last point I raised, which is another challenge that we have as we think about this, is that we are increasingly relying on partners who come from outside of healthcare, technology innovators, and it's fantastic, right? They bring a mindset and a technical capability and innovative energy that we desperately need, and so we embrace it. But we also are working with those partners, those same partners who often don't fully appreciate the balance that we need to have in healthcare between recklessness and speed, to put it most bluntly. And so that's just a challenge as we think about more and more partners being able to push that innovative envelope as fast as we can, leveraging the energy and the capabilities that they have, but always making sure that we are doing the responsible innovation within the healthcare construct and within our Mayo Clinic values that serve our patients at the end of the day. So thank you very much, and look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Mickey. Thank you really very much, because I think you've illustrated, certainly to this purposeful public, that how a leading academic medical center, as is others across the country, can use, in fact, the information it has, the material it has, bring new technology in there to quickly speed the improvement of health and healthcare altogether. You mentioned about partners. I know that you talk about the importance of partnering with the private sector, but obviously partners with the patients themselves. And finally, you emphasized the importance of responsible innovation. So thank you. Let me turn to Dan. Dan, over to you.
Great. Thanks so much, Victor. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, great. So thanks very much for inviting me. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. I want to talk about two things from the perspective of ICER. And for those of you who don't know ICER that well, we are a private sector health technology assessment organization. So we produce public reports on the clinical evidence, comparative clinical effectiveness, and the economic impact of new technologies, drugs, devices, and other types of interventions. And we're focused both on cost effectiveness and the budgetary impact of these interventions. And as Victor said, we are in an era where we're seeing really incredible innovations come to market. But at the same time, we're also seeing sometimes breathtaking costs and prices associated with these technologies. So interestingly, a couple of days ago, it may have actually even been last Sunday, my friend and neighbor, John Gruber, who's the chair of economics at MIT, was featured on a 60 Minutes segment that focused on cell and gene therapies. And he quite appropriately pointed out that there's a substantial percentage of employers in this country who self-insure for healthcare. They pay their own medical bills. For a medium-sized employer, one or two claims for a cell or gene therapy at multiple millions of dollars could break the bank that year for that particular employer. So innovation in many ways is butting up against a system that's really ill-equipped to try to figure out how to pay for and foster those innovations. The other challenge that I want to bring into the discussion is a challenge around incentives, and many of those incentives are coming through regulatory frameworks, which are encouraging expedited regulatory review and approval for certain types of technologies, but in a way that's creating a sort of Me Too generation, a new Me Too generation for some of these innovative types of therapies that are very focused on specific clinical areas. So we have seen major innovations. Many cancers that used to be lethal are now essentially manageable chronic diseases. But there are other conditions beyond cancer and beyond very rare disease, for example, that really still represent a significant area of unmet need. I think about neurological or neurodegenerative conditions, for example. And but the incentives that exist are really very specifically aligned with certain types of therapies. And so we have a lot of therapies that are innovative in nature, but are very similar in their activity that are getting approved through these expedited frameworks. And at the same time, there are other clinical areas with significant unmet need, and that unmet need is not being met at the moment. So when we think about remedies and possible solutions, we always talk about a way to think about pricing in a manner that provides the right signals for innovation, provides an affordable solution for the health system, and also creates an opportunity for reasonable and equitable access for patients. That's a difficult trilemma to think about, but it's something that we always need to be aspiring to. And there's been a lot of interesting work in trying to quantify some of these challenges and figure out ways to address them. So for example, just the simple calculation of life expectancy or quality adjusted life expectancy shortfalls in certain disease areas can provide a signal to developers around where that unmet need is greatest and where some of the challenges still exist. On the pricing side, there's been a lot of interesting work done. In fact, Dr. Ujong Lee, who's a member of my team at ICER and is also a member of the work group and is with you in DC today, is leading an effort to implement what we call a dynamic efficiency framework. This is something that was developed in the UK by the University of York, and we're adapting that analysis for the US population, the US audience, to try to understand how innovation responds to levels of pricing and payment. And if you think about it, that is not a linear relationship. It's not as though as price goes up and up, the level of innovation increases at a linear rate. There are diminishing returns associated with this. So there's an optimum level of payment that represents that level of innovation that will maximize population health. This is a framework that attempts to get at that. And while it's trying to adjust for differences in the US health system relative to the UK, it is still the case that there are diminishing returns. So innovation does respond to payment, but up to a certain point. And so we're trying to do that work to understand it. There are other methods at play to try to understand how to recommend a value-based price, a price that's aligned with benefit, in a manner that is accounting for the uncertainty in data that we often see when a drug is approved, especially through one of those expedited regulatory frameworks or another technology for that matter. It doesn't have to be a drug. And so when there is a lot of uncertainty, it is possible that it's the case that that level of payment should be lower until that uncertainty is resolved to a certain extent. And so there are methods to try to explore that as well. And so we're working to try to bring some of these methods to bear and to try to understand how, as a collective health system, we can afford these innovations, we can foster these innovations, and we can make sure that patients have equitable access to them. So with that, I will look forward to the discussion and turn it over to Kathy.
Dan, let me say thank you. And you've actually touched on a number of really important issues. And this is a public seminar, so we want people to understand that we are looking at those issues, you and many others, right? Affordability, who pays for it, what are the incentives, and how do we meet unmet needs? And of course, as you said, pricing and what's the return on some of these innovations. So really important issues. Kathy, let me turn over to you then with regards to looking at technology transfer.
Thank you. I want to say that I spent the bulk of my career at Stanford University helping them with the university innovation ecosystem. But now I also work for a law firm that helps startups start and take inventions from universities into companies. So I'm speaking from sort of two perspectives. I start with the academic researchers. Academic researchers have always been interested in sharing their innovations with industry. But until 1980, when the Bayh-Dole law was passed, there wasn't a systematic way to bring forward commercializable research results. The Bayh-Dole law enabled U.S. universities to establish an effective system, which we call tech transfer, to move very early stage innovations from the university to industry for society's use and benefit. Tech transfer offices do this by patenting inventions and then hopefully entering into agreements with industry called license agreements. And these companies are committed to bringing a product to the marketplace. Countless medical diagnostics, medical devices, and therapies have come out of basic university research. Through these 45 years, university technology transfer has gotten pretty sophisticated. Universities insist that companies should diligently develop technologies, or they have to give the technology back to the universities. Companies can't just sit on technologies. In 2007, a small group of universities created a document entitled "In the Public Interest: 9 Points to Consider in Licensing University Technology." The point of the document was to address important societal, policy, and legislative issues in university tech transfer, and to make sure universities were acting in the public interest when they do their tech transfer. Since 2007, more than 100 organizations worldwide have signed on to this document. So I do believe university tech transfers want to do the right thing, and they are thoughtful in their approach in licensing technologies in the public interest and for society's benefit. Universities that have revolutionary biomedical innovations know that there's an important balancing act between getting the technology out to the public as quickly as possible, encouraging and enabling investment in risky new technologies that often means working with early stage startups, while making sure that patients benefit. I want to point out that the 9th point of this Points to Consider document, for example, encouraged universities to think about how to address unmet needs, such as those of neglected patient populations or access by patient populations in particular global geographic areas, such as developing countries. So in my current role, I help startups transfer research from universities to their fledgling company. These startups are just trying to build their companies, find investors, hire researchers, develop the technology. At this point in their life cycle, they're probably not thinking about responsible innovation, but they too need to be included in this effort. So in closing, I feel like we need to involve the technology transfer community in this effort more. I'm not sure that everyone knows about it. So with input from the University Tech Transfer offices, we first have to define more clearly what responsible innovation principles are for this sector, and then share them with the broader community. I also think that startups truly want to make a positive difference in the world, and they too need to be involved in this effort, and I think they will want to be. So I'm very excited to be part of this initiative and very supportive of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy, and explaining, in fact, how this works and how important it is to consider the public good and unmet societal needs. So I hope the audience have heard really how it works. You started with a research and in this case, Mayo. Then you look at how to get major discovery to the patients and public. One mechanism is to go through tech transfer into startups or into licensing to big industry, which then creates a product commercialized, but having to do a lot of work in development. And of course, then you hear the issue that comes out from this, unmet needs, incentives, affordability, you name it. So that gives you the ecosystem. Let me turn to this second part of our talk, which is trust in science and innovation, community and patient voices. And we have also three world-class experts. First, Brian Southwell, who's a distinguished fellow and lead scientist for public understanding of science at the RTI International. Second, we have Reed Tuckson, who in fact is a member of the NAM, a managing director of Tuckson Health Connections. He's been doing a lot of work on looking at how to create trust in community. And third is Benjamin Haywood, who's a general partner of Sky River Ventures. And what's unique about Benjamin's work is that he co-founded Patients Like Me, a early social network of people living with chronic disease, and look at how to help them addressing many issues such as legal, finance, and others. So let me start off first with Brian.
Great. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate the chance to be here today, and this is a vital conversation, and I appreciate you organizing the discussion. Now, I do want to raise one consideration for us. If we're going to use a word, like responsible, we have to realize that some people are going to ask, I think, understandably, who's judging what counts as responsible? And, they're going to ask the question, why should it be those of us on the screen making that decision? Ultimately, we probably need to focus not just on being responsible, but also being responsive and trying to find ways to be collaborative and as we move forward. So how could we do that? How could we actually improve, this as we approach innovation development and to consider this dimension? Well, I think there's at least three things that we could be doing. First is to ask serious questions about the concept of trust and what it actually means. For a word that is bandied about virtually every day, it seems, we hear this in common everyday language. We don't actually spend a whole lot of time defining what we mean by trust and asking questions about what trust means to different communities and to different people and different institutions. And I think if we did that, we might have a better ground to stand on here. I think ultimately many people are going to care about intellectual credibility. They're going to care if a particular speaker is smart or knowledgeable. But they're also going to care if that a person or that organization seems to care whether they live or die. Seems to have some of the same interests and values that they do. So ultimately, we probably need to expand and consider at least a dimension of trust as being this notion of shared interest. And I think that's something that if we could better accommodate and understand and anticipate that's going to be a dimension of how we're judged, I think that's going to be important. Another aspect of how we might think about this moving forward is, and this hopefully this all offers us some room for hope and optimism. I think we need to better consider and try to understand what mental models different communities have of the scientific process. Not just awareness of particular facts, but the extent to which people understand the process of science, as an iterative, effort, something that we could celebrate, but also something that's going to, take us sometimes 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And I think if we could better, and have a more robust sense of the process of science, we'd have a better, forum for really engaging with and talking with communities, about that. And the third note that I'll raise here is that, at any one moment, we might talk about the state of, engagement with different communities. And I think it's really important for us to recognize that at best, we're going to have a sense of that as a snapshot, in time. And I think we need to think more longitudinally and to realize that actually perceptions of new technologies can and do change, over time. And that's something we've got to both anticipate and to recognize and have some patience with. This is certainly something that we've highlighted previously, just as one example in the 2024 Science and Engineering Indicators report on public perceptions of science and technology. There's a look at how some ideas tend to evolve over time when it comes to new technologies. And I think that's something that we've got to anticipate and build into some of our discussion here. I know we're a bit short on time, so I'm going to cede the floor to Dr. Tuxen here next, but I'm happy to talk further in the following discussion. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed, really, in bringing many of these issues into consideration. Reed, you've been doing a lot of work on, yeah.
Appreciate this. I'm talking to you from the perspective of being the co-founder and chair of the board of the Coalition for Trust in Health and Science, bringing together more than 100 organizations across the entire health ecosystem for the first time ever in American history to bring to look at some of these issues. I very much want to underscore what Brian said about the notion of the need for engagement. We as science and as clinicians are too far away from the American people. We have got to get closer. We are eating the rancid fruit now of our suboptimal efforts to engage with the communities that we serve. We've always had rules and requirements or the natural inclination to partner with those who are living in our catchment area for our hospital, our institution, our medical practice, or our research institution. We've known we need to do it. We've done some of it, but we are clearly showing and seeing that we're not doing enough of it. So we have to be involved. And we have to use the leadership of organizations to help mobilize in an efficient way the clinicians and the researchers to be able to engage with the public. That also means that there is an art and science to listening. We have always known in medicine that there was an art and science to the communication of the therapeutic regimen with the patient or elucidating the medical history. Those skill sets need to be augmented and expanded as we engage in these conversations with the American people. Number two, we are going to need to spend much more of our energy and capital on focusing on science education in our junior and senior high schools. We simply have to turn off the spigot of stupid. Our kids that are growing up as adults, do not understand any of the basic science that is going to govern their world, particularly in the area of genetics. We know that there are people who think differently than maybe a lot of us who are in this process, who are looking at attacking school boards and science education, moving them back towards more biblical foci and or ruling out things like mRNA. We cannot cede that ground, or else the future of the American people is going to be in serious conversation. Third, we have got to deal with the issue of conflict of interest. This is one of the major initiatives that we at the Coalition for Trust in Health and Science are working on. We're inviting the National Academy of Medicine to join with an incredible cadre of people from our journals, from our professional societies, from across the whole spectrum of healthcare, looking at how can we continue as a normal function of our professional accountabilities and obligations, enhance this conflict of interest rules? How do we look at them from our own individual disciplines, and how do they fit into the total mosaic so that the American people can have confidence that we're making decisions based on the right principles, the ethical principles, and not on inappropriate conflicts of interest? This is real work that's got to get done. Lastly, as in my last minute and a half, we were asked to think about what keeps us awake on the biomedicine advancement. I'm glad to hear my other colleagues talk about affordability and value. Chris, I use the term innovation for innovation's sake is meaningless unless it leads to absolute value. We have to remember the number of Americans who are in medical bankruptcy. It is an extraordinary number. We cannot afford the healthcare system we have now. And so we must make sure, as a matter of highest priority, that we are doing things, bringing new products into the market that are going to be sensitive to the notion of whether or not we're going to bankrupt even more Americans who cannot afford what we have. I am particularly interested in as Chris Viehbacher kind of got into and Dan got into, is there's no clear pathway to aligning our policy objectives with the discovery pathway, certainly not in this current environment that we're living right now. How do you decide what are the things we most need to solve and then move dollars and innovation in those directions? Right now, there really is no one-to-one relationship there. And so we have a collision of availability of capital at the early drug stage discovery process combined with an uncertain FDA regulatory process. And this bodes very challenging for the small companies that are underneath big pharma who are trying to make it. I also want you to be very attentive as we look at translating our discovery into access, the community-based infrastructure of communities. If you do not have the community-based infrastructure in place, and unfortunately, as we are speaking now, it is being destroyed and unfunded by the current administration, you're not going to have the people on the ground who can do the work to actually implement new information, new techniques, new opportunities into life for so many of the American people. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Reed. Let's turn to Benjamin.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you guys, and thank you for having me, Reed. I double click on everything you said, +1 on everything there. So I'm talking a little bit from the two roles. I spent over 15 years working with the Patients Like Me community, a company we founded in 2004. Over 700,000 patients with chronic illnesses sharing their experiences and crowdsourcing phenotypic data and information about their disease. So now I invest in early stage deep tech, so basically innovation, including healthcare. So just on the practical side, on the patient side, I mean, just to get very specific, how do you do this? First and foremost, innovators need to decide they want to engage patients. This is the first step. It's the first step to engaging communities and the patients. Second of all, I think they need to engage the patients of the communities that are relevant to their technology. So not just any patient and bring them in the room. You got to get a patient relative to what you're working on. And I actually would include in that, don't grab clinician patients. I know they are the people close to you and they may have the condition, but they are going to bring their expert biases in with their patient expertise. And I would encourage you to get sort of patients who are relatively naive to the medical and clinical system as you think about it. I mean, third, there's two sort of mindset shifts that I think innovators need to do. I think they need to open up the aperture of where they think the patient can add value. So obviously you're an expert in super deep innovation. They're not going to come and teach you how to advance that piece of science or that engineering one more step necessarily, although they might. But they may, help you think about distribution or next steps or how you would actually think about measuring or engaging and proving out the technology with the patient community or the individuals that you're looking to help with that innovation. The other mindset shift I think is a little harder is, remember, innovators are experts in their specific area, but patients are experts in their disease and living with their disease every day. And if you can't mind shift into thinking of them like that, you really won't really engage them effectively in the innovation arena, because you'll always think of as an add-on or some voice over here and not an expert. So that's just on the patient side. On the keeping me up at night, I couple things really. So I'm really worried about our clinical care system. I think, with burnout in physicians, I think our capacity to provide care for is worsening over time. I had hoped that the Gen Z and millennials would bring consumerism and basically say, no, it's not good enough, we need to do it. I'm really bullish on sort of consumerism and precision medicine, but there's a few challenges to it as the system exists today. So on this consumer tech side, we've seen now real consumer tech that has clinical value. My mom manages her AFib with her Apple Watch, right? But the reality is startups in that space tend to have a very specific choice. They have to go the consumer route, in which case they tend to underinvest and can't do the science, or they have to go after the high price of clinical and hard science. And we have to figure out new business models, new ways of paying for this to sort of get both quality consumer devices with real science behind it. The second real big problem, and I invest and look at a lot of AI companies, is that one of the things investors look for is moats around data, so proprietary data sets. And we all know in healthcare there's biases in data. There's a lack of data around underrepresented patients. And then, so when companies are coming and going to the market, they tend to have these proprietary data sets, and that's exacerbating that problem, even though I know there's a lot of investment on the public side to to increase the representation of data. I do worry a ton about the public health communication and infrastructure and the trust that broke down in the last 4 or 5 years. I think we have a lot of groundwork, and I think Reed's points just there, I think about rebuilding that trust and is super important. And then, just the last point, and this is a little bit about the system as it exists today and why I'm sort of bullish on precision medicine. Around 2018-19, Patients Like Me was running one of the largest multi-omics direct-to-consumer studies, a couple thousand patients, full genome, 1,000+ proteins, full RNAi, very large-scale study to develop predictive models of chronic disease. And I will say at the time that electronic medical record added almost zero signal to the predictive models of chronic disease. So when I think about the future of healthcare, I don't worry about any data we currently have in the system. I don't think it will be part of the future of healthcare. I think for chronic care and wellness. So I worry that we're not going fast enough on the precision medicine side. I think the gentleman from Biogen mentioned that 1 year of delay in the ALS community, which is how I got started in this. My brother passed from ALS and we started an institute in that space. 1 year of delay of a new technology that can solve that disease is 5,000 lives, right? So that community thinks about risks a lot different than you and I. And I think we have to remember that as we work on this problem. So I'll leave it at that and open up for questions.
Well, first of all, please join me in a round of applause for the 6 panelists. Well, I think that the 2 panels pretty much illustrate, certainly to this audience, but to the public, that whole ecosystem, if you will, of how you get discovery. It moves from, let's say, universities to tech transfer. Technology transfer moves into startup, and then maybe large companies to move into patients. But the challenge that we face, I think it was Reed's word about discovery to policy pathway, is something that we need to really address, how to make this faster, more seamless, frictionless, and to work for the patients. But then there's a whole discussion about, after that, a lot of the things we have to consider. And that consideration actually have to start much earlier, which is, can you afford it? How do you price it? How do you see the return on investment? How do you get trust from the public to say, yes, we're all working for your benefit, but not for, at Reed's point about conflict of interest, our own benefit. And so this, in fact, is the whole scope of why we have this webinar. So now it's open for questions. I guess we're going to take online as well as in person. Yes, Lee, you have the first question.
Yeah, it's a comment, but a query. And this relates to an old NAM report about the 510K pathway, so on the device side. And having worked with a lot of companies, the value of early evidence generation to be able to show the value. You talked a lot about sort of the affordability, but also whether or not it works. I mean, as a physician of 35 years, I watched a lot of the technology we use in anesthesia be de-adopted because we just adopted it because of the push. So how do we get to the idea of the fastest path may not be the best path today, and really, in the beginning, think about, in a value-based world, getting to showing the value. We have ICER here, showing the value earlier.
Okay, this is to any of the panelists. Dan, do you want to take this on first?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. And it is a great question because was talking mostly about expedited regulatory pathways for pharmaceuticals, but I think the 510K is a really good example for devices as well. So there is limited evidence at the time of initial approval. And in particular with devices, you not only have to think about that evidence playing out, but you also have to think about the learning curve. So clinicians have to learn how to use this device and apply it in practice, and how real world outcomes play out can differ. That being said, I think what a lot of people talk about as a remedy is not necessarily value assessment itself, but value-based or outcomes-based contracts, where there is potentially a shared financial risk between the manufacturer and the payer. And as evidence is accumulated, that payment may be adjusted or there may be some clawbacks available. That is an incredibly labor-intensive effort at the moment. And oftentimes the burden is on the payer or the employer to collect that information. They don't have the resources to do it. And any contract is sort of an N of one. It's not really scalable across technologies. So I think that, as I mentioned earlier, exploration of methods to try to understand how to integrate that uncertainty that comes with that initial approval into pricing that is, and reimbursement that happens at the time a deal is struck, with the potential to adjust it as evidence is generated and uncertainty is resolved, is a really promising area to think about, and a more scalable one in my view.
Any other from the panel want to answer this question?
Yeah, I mean,
yes,
I'll
Mickey.
just say that this has been, I just, I think innovation comes through rapid iteration. And I think the variable, if you want to maximize innovation's impact, the variable you need to concentrate is the time to know whether something works. And that's on an individual patient level, it's on a hospital level, it's on a system level. And I think we need to really, the more you reduce that, the more you're able to figure out if it works, move on to the next thing, rapidly iterate. That's not to say you should eliminate regulations, but you have to concentrate on thinking about how you reduce the time to know whether something works, again, at every level of the healthcare system.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, Mickey.
Yeah, I just a few thoughts on this one. And I think the importance of local governance here is just, one of the areas where I think it's really pronounced, where to whoever answered the question, most of the solutions that have been through the FDA approval process have gone through the 510K. I think it's like 97%. And there is no requirement for evidence related to performance. It's always tied to a predicate device. But we at Mayo, for example, as we think about our solutions, they are required to go through a performance validation and patient safety assessment, and we ourselves then will judge if it's up to what we believe is the standard of care and the improvement of standard of care that we're looking at. That's the first point. Second is we are now putting in place a more robust process for the clinical practice, the clinicians themselves, to prioritize through our approval process, through our governance process, for us to be able to make sure that the solutions that we're going to put in front of the clinicians are the ones that the clinicians actually want. Because with this growth and innovation, you have lots of different kinds of solutions that are being put forward. We can only implement a certain number in any given period of time, and so we want to make sure that our clinicians are the ones who are, on behalf of the patients, obviously, are looking at those solutions and choosing the ones that they think are going to have the best impact from a clinical perspective and in alignment with our bold forward strategy, which is a Mayo-wide strategy.
Thank you. Nita, you have a question? Adi. Yes. Adi Rai. Adi Rai, I know.
It was a compliment. I'm happy to be meeting. People hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So this goes back to a point that some folks made earlier on, which is that most innovation reduces cost. Okay. Oh, okay. All right. This is a point that most people know, and it was a point that was made earlier, and it goes back to that point, my question. Most innovation reduces cost. That has not regrettably been the case with health innovation historically. So if we're talking about thinking, forward thinking in terms of how to address the challenge of cost in particular and access, is there a way to use AI or whatever other mechanisms we can think of to reduce the 2.3 billion that it takes to get a drug to market, because at the end of the day, if you can't reduce that 2.3 billion, then you're, or whatever you want to call the number, there's just no way to square that circle otherwise, if you can't do that.
Anybody want to, I mean, I think the answer is yes, but let's see what, Chris?
Well, yeah, I know a lot about the 2.3 billion, I guess. Yes, so I think yes is the answer, because there's probably two main sources why it's 2.3 billion. You know, the first is that so many things fail, right? So the 2.3 billion has to cover the cost of all of the drugs. I mean, if at any one time we've got about 5,000 molecules in phase 1, and we're getting maybe somewhere between 40 and 50 approved at the end, right? And so I do think, and we had a conversation yesterday afternoon about it, you know, one of the biggest frustrations is how many times we repeat an experiment that someone else has already shown to have failed. And this comes down to a data sharing question, and the comment was made that during COVID, for instance, that we were able to much more rapidly share data and see how fast things progressed. And so there's probably that. There's also, you know, just even scientists, you know, the reality is there's a ton of published literature. Not everybody's got a time to read it, but now you've got, certainly one of the things that we're doing in our group is, you know, have AI summarize a lot of what has already been published in this space, because, you know, just even if it's public, that doesn't necessarily mean it's known. And AI puts everything that is known in the world really at your fingertips, assuming that, you know, obviously the data is available. The other piece is obviously the clinical development piece, right? And it's costing hundreds of thousands of dollars per patient to do clinical studies. You know, if you're doing a study of 450 patients, you're probably going to have 500 more sites, because we recruit 1 or 0 on average in each site. Now, one of the things that we're doing is actually you can use AI to access medical records, and you can go and have a look at social media and find patients who have a particular condition. We did this actually with a recent study in lupus for a major medical center in the US, where we say, all right, here's all these patients who are diagnosed with lupus. Here's patients who are not satisfied with their treatment, or are no longer in remission and having a flare. And all on an anonymized basis from our point of view, we actually created a virtual waiting room of 50 patients for that medical center. Now, if we can start to do that, then I think we can dramatically reduce it. Then you've got whole exercises on medical writing. It's millions of pages to submit a regulatory approval, for example, or any kind of clinical report, and using you know, generative AI, for example, to write a lot of those reports can actually dramatically reduce the cost. Now, I'm not sure we're going to get it down to 200 million, but we could probably make a dent in that.
Victor, I think that Chris is right on it. I think inevitably AI is going to help make it much more cost effective around picking the right molecules. We will do better, I would have to imagine, that we'll pick better molecules because of that. We also know that at every step, including what Chris just indicates, even at the conduct of the clinical trials out in the fields, that people are using AI technologies to be able to be more efficient on just the backroom administrative stuff that you just got to go through. So at every level, it does take costs out. Will that be enough, though, to make a meaningful difference in the ultimate complex multifactorial formula for the ultimate pricing of the drug? I don't think you can make that one-to-one. I think that's a tough analysis to make just on the back of only one intervention in the complex of multifactorial analysis. I would say also that we need to also just remember that the AI benefits will also be overwhelmingly challenged by the negative aspects of the fact that for the first time in history, you will never know the truth or veracity of anything you see or anything that you read. You simply don't know. Right. And when you have that level of confusion and chaos, the implications of that for the drug discovery and everything else in healthcare will have to be evaluated.
Thank you for those words of reality, I guess. Yes, question.
Yeah, so Wynn Williams here from Mass General Hospital, and I've been an academic nephrologist, a transplant nephrologist at Mass General for 35 years. So from that standpoint, I'll speak to a frontline experience that we're experiencing now that really dovetails with Mercedes' earlier comments about trainees who are coming along and trying to pursue careers in science. And then second, my second hat is as an editor at the New England Journal of Medicine, and this question is to Chris again. And so 3, 5, 4 years ago, Chris, what we were concerned about and what continues to be a concern is that randomized controlled trials, which is really the heartbeat of what you try and manage bringing innovation and discoveries in medicine to the fore, were woefully underrepresented with populations that are vulnerable. So vulnerable populations, minority populations didn't show up. And so we issued a required table of representativeness for any randomized controlled trial submitted to the journal. And it was a supplementary table, basically a structured table that looked at study participants' demographics. You know, the idea is to encourage studies to reflect the patients. The research aims to help, and if the research didn't, what was the accountability to the investigators in terms of their comments about underrepresentation? And if you look at the ecosystem that you've been describing this morning, it's really very complex. You talk about research and development. There are a lot of moving parts. You have to satisfy market forces. You have to satisfy your shareholders, boards of directors. You have regulatory requirements. All of that is occurring in an environment where there's intense competition. And so the mandate really is to complete clinical trials as efficiently as you can at limited costs to generate a result that can come to market. And in that regard, then minority patients are not represented. And still, every week at the journal, we look at groundbreaking randomized controlled trials that are underrepresented mini groups that should be targeted groups for some of these innovations going forward, and they won't benefit from the innovations. So how do you answer that? Big pharma, biotech?
I'm getting all the tough ones here. No, I think, first of all, I completely agree with you. And now I can really only speak for Biogen here, but I will say that we have had a concerted effort for a number of years to ensure that all of our clinical trials are representative of the underlying epidemiology. We actually have here, she's still in the room, Lauren Powell, who is our chief equity officer. We, I think, are the only one to have that, where her whole objective is exactly what you're trying to do. Do we have the right representation of people in our clinical studies? But I can also tell you that, for instance, I just talked about lupus. Well, we know lupus, for example, is much more predominant in African American women, and we know that that population has much greater challenges in accessing healthcare. And we are already working several years now before the launch of the product, learning actually from how we engaged patients to get into trials. But how do we actually now make sure that when that drug is available, that it is going to be available to all of that patient population? I can tell you that we have a global scorecard that governs the incentive comp system for our entire company, ensuring that at least 90% of our clinical trials have that representation is on our scorecard. And it's something that we see as extremely important.
And I may say journal plays a really important role as its funders and others to assure all these issues are adequately addressed, right? That's the whole thing about ecosystem. Kathy Koo, I was really encouraged to hear about this in the public trust kind of, if you will, agreement. And can you give me an example of what can be binding when you do tech transfer to, say, either a startup or licensing, that you can say, listen, we want to be sure that you have equity issues. You want to be sure that you're addressing ethical issues. What are the tools to be sure these issues are binding?
Well, many times in license agreements now with companies, there is a provision that says you'll make the technology available to certain populations. And if you can't, that you'll be able to sublicense or make sure that somebody else can develop it for that population. And, you know, the NIH recently put in an access plan concept where when you enter into a license with NIH, they want you to have an access plan for when you sell a product. So I've seen this kind of provision in some of these university licenses too. There is a consciousness about getting technologies out to populations that are not normally served.
Yeah, I guess the question is tracking and accountability, right? That's probably still not well developed, although the concept is there. It's a good starting point. I think what we need to do is to be sure that we track, and you know, obviously it comes down to universities, et cetera, tracking whether these agreements are being honored and how do you in fact enforce them. So, but that's an important starting point. Other questions?
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So just, I wanted to harken back to Mercedes' comments, and just to, from a 30,000-foot perspective, just to say that in the current environment, the current administrative overlay to this work, there's a generation of investigators that are being directed not to engage in equity and fairness. The mandates of this conference and this work, they're actively being discouraged and their funding is being dismantled. That's a real problem for the next generation to implement what we're trying to actually formulate and put into play here.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Certainly the executive order against DEI and its implication of research, the research, yeah. Yeah. It's a very troubling issue altogether. Right.
Thanks for the presentation. I want to go back to what Dan said about where the innovations are happening. So I think earlier today we talked about how much we should listen to patients and where the unmet needs are. But at the same time, I think also we need to hear from manufacturers what they think about, because addressing unmet needs may not really align with the goal of manufacturers and how they make profits. And also profits linked to sustainable innovations, I think, in the future. So I want to hear from maybe manufacturers and from the panelists, who's in the best position to address this concern. I think it could be policymaker, right, making mandatory policy, but I think it also may requires more data generation in unmet needs and keep tracking of things over time. So I want to hear what we can do better to better incentivize manufacturers to make innovations in the right place.
Good point. I'm not sure if anyone want to take this on. Reed? No?
I can.
Oh, Mickey. Yeah.
It's go ahead. I'll go after Mickey. Go ahead.
Okay, thanks, Reed. So, I mean, just a couple of thoughts that I think are general, maybe not specific to the question, but hopefully are helpful. One is, we have to make it easier to be able to share information for us to be able to, going back to the previous question, to have the better representativeness that we all want to be able to have. I mean, if that continues to be the obstacle that it is today, then it's just really hard to be able to get that kind of representativeness when you're trying to get these kinds of solutions into the hands of front-facing healthcare professionals. We at Mayo Clinic have the Mayo Clinic platform, which is a collaborative platform to get organizations to share information in a de-identified manner to be able to do that. But whatever the mechanism is, I think that's one thing that that needs to be a little bit of a policy and an industry imperative to say, how do we do that? The second is making it easier for the ability to share some of these innovations. Right now, if you are going to distribute or try to share an innovation with another party, for example, outside of a provider organization, for example, under FDA regulations, you have to go through the full FDA approval process, for commercialization or outside licensing, which is a little bit of a barrier for those who are developing solutions within an academic medical center, for example, and genuinely wanting to be able to share those kinds of innovations for the clinical practice. There are certain ways you can do it for research, but then it's circumscribed and how it can be used. So I think that there are some things that that we can do to try to make it easier for the sharing of this types of technologies. The last thing I would point to, perhaps for manufacturers, is that and maybe this is an FDA consideration, is thinking about the different kinds of approaches we might use from a governance and regulatory posture perspective for solutions that are being deployed within an already regulated healthcare organization, whether it's a provider or a payer who already are subject to HIPAA, already subject to Joint Commission, already subject conditions of participation from Medicare and Medicaid, versus solutions that are just being put out in the wild. And we may want to think about, sort of different types of regulations for those kinds of solutions so that you can allow an easier proliferation of those in organizations that are already delivering that care and already have a lot of, professional, motivation, as well as regulatory overlay that they already have to live under.
Thank you.
I'm sorry.
Sorry. Yeah, go ahead, Reed.
No, I just quickly would say that I ground my comment in being enormously proud of being a part of the American research and clinical medicine infrastructure and preventive medicine infrastructure. I'm proud of the motives of the people that work in this field, and I know they care about these issues. Having said that, we've got to do a better job of being able to make the good intentions real in the world. So clinical trials. Organizing the communities of color and disadvantaged communities to be able to participate in more efficient and effective clinical trial enrollment is very important. Work is going on in that space, but I keep coming back to the need for a robust community-based infrastructure to partner with research and partner with healthcare. That being said, the economics are still the driver. And let's just not forget how important the economics really are. And so kind of the good news and the perverse bad news is that disadvantaged people generally suffer worse from so many other conditions. So there is a real need for therapeutic interventions by these communities. The question then becomes, how do we get the affordability of those communities to access the drugs that they need? And that's why the research and clinical community may get bored by things like Medicaid policy discussions. But I would say to you that no one went into this field, or I think very few of the people that I know and respect went into this field just for very narrow purposes. If you read their essays to get into medical school, it was, I want to make the world a healthy place. I want to make sure that every person gets to maximize their own individual God-given human potential, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So if you really do give a damn about the outcome, ultimately, you will find the time to devote just a piece of your effort in partnership with your colleagues towards getting at fighting those policy issues that make therapeutic realities actually come to life.
I almost want to applaud for you, but then we'll save it to the last question. Last two then. Yeah, go ahead.
No, thank you all so much for this, for your perspectives, really invaluable. I'm Kaushik Sundararajan from the University of Chicago. I'm an anthropologist who works on healthcare in the global south. So I wanted to bring in this question of whether, when, and how a global perspective on this conversation might help. Now, mRNA vaccines came up. This is a gold standard in terms of speed of innovation, data sharing, rollout in the US. Right? In places like Africa, there was a complete lack of access because of cost issues. And some of the decisions that facilitated access in the US were directly at cross purposes with ensuring broad global accessibility. And this led to a term that's very commonly used in Africa and parts of the global south that we don't hear in the US that much, which is vaccine apartheid. And that's not a minor term in the global south. It's a central part of public discourse about how innovation is seen in large parts of the world. And there are three consequences to this. Right? The first is in terms of trust. So if scientists from the global north roll up 2 years after the pandemic with a multi-million-dollar gene therapy for sickle cell anemia and say this is going to help eradicate the disease in Africa, people there know that in their recent memory, mRNA vaccines weren't made available. So it sounds absurd to them. There is no trust that kind of program of access is going to be implemented. Second, what it has led to in places like Africa is the development of new institutional arrangements like mRNA vaccine hubs that are about intra-African collaboration that largely exclude the US from the conversation. But it also means that there's an enormous amount of innovation that's happening in developing distributive capacity. And so if one considers the enormous lack of innovation and imagination around distributive capacity in the US, there's actually quite a lot to learn from other parts of the world, and how might we, institutionalize that. And finally, a concern with innovative distribution centers equity. And I think, this has come up before. There is no possibility of responsible innovation without centering equity, and substituting responsibility for equity leaves certain important things out. And while understanding the difficulty of the sort of political climate in terms of conversations about equity, I don't think we can afford to leave that off the table, and we have to make an affirmative case for it.
Kaushik, I appreciate those comments. Tony and I talked about this earlier. My feeling is responsibility includes equity, right? It's the word that we use, and I feel that this community want to do responsible innovation that includes equity, ethics, safety, and all those issues. So absolutely. I think we're running quite late, so if you don't mind, David, why don't I just call this really a great session, and a round of applause for the panelists.